From next month on, we'll be transferring all your money into my account, my son said. I just smiled. That evening, like always, he showed up with his wife for their free dinner. But the moment they walked into my house, both of them screamed in shock. Can you imagine your own son, the one you poured your entire life into, looking you dead in the eye and demanding total control of your life savings? It happened to me. And in that moment, something inside me shattered, revealing a truth I had desperately tried to ignore for years. It was a Thursday afternoon. My son Lawrence was sitting in my kitchen sipping my coffee as if he owned the place. He looked at me, a calm, almost predatory smile on his face, and said, "Mom, starting with your next paycheck, we're going to transfer all your money to my account." Just like that. As if it was the most natural thing in the world. As if he was doing me a favor. As if I, at 62 years old, was suddenly incapable of managing my own finances. I just stared at him. The words caught in my throat. I searched his eyes, desperate for some flicker of explanation, some hint of genuine concern from the boy I'd raised alone, the one I'd fed with the literal sweat of my brow. But there was nothing. Just that unsettling calm, that chilling confidence of someone who knows they're in control. So I took a deep breath and against every instinct I said, "Yes, Lawrence, that sounds fine. I trust you." His smile widened. He stood up, gave me a quick mechanical kiss on the forehead, one of those empty gestures, and told me it was for the best. "You won't have to worry about a thing," he said. "I'll take care of everything. It's for your own good." Those words echoed long after he left, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. That very same night, like every Friday, Lawrence returned. But he wasn't alone. His wife was with him just as she always was. They expected dinner, of course. Hot free food just like they'd had every Friday for the past 3 years. I heard their footsteps at the front door. I heard the key. The key I'd given him so he'd always feel welcome turning in the lock. And then, I heard the scream. It was high-pitched, desperate. The sound of someone who just realized things weren't going to be their way. I stayed seated in my chair in my empty kitchen in my empty house, listening to that scream echo. I didn't move. I didn't need to go see what was happening. I already knew. Lawrence burst into the kitchen, his face pale, eyes wide with shock. His wife followed, a mirror image of disbelief. "Mom," he yelled. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything? Where's the furniture? The TV? Where is everything that was here?" I looked at him, a strange calm washing over me, a tranquility I didn't know I possessed. In the softest voice I could find, I explained, "Oh, I sold some things. I needed the money. After all, if you're going to manage my finances, I needed to make sure I had some cash first, right?" His face went from pale to a furious red. He took a step towards me, and for the first time I saw my son for what he truly was. Not the boy I'd raised, not the man I'd helped build a life. He was a stranger. Someone looking at me with pure contempt, with rage, with something that looked dangerously like hatred. "You're crazy," he spat. "Completely crazy. How could you sell everything without asking me? Now what are we going to do when we come over? How are we going to be comfortable here?" That was it. That was the sentence that changed everything. How are we going to be comfortable here? Not, how are you going to be comfortable, Mom? He wasn't worried about my comfort. He was worried about theirs. As if my home, my possessions, existed solely for their convenience. His wife stepped forward, those cold, calculating eyes fixed on me. She said I was selfish. That I was only thinking about myself. That they came every week to keep me company, to make sure I was okay. And this was how I repaid them. Selfish. Me? The woman who worked double shifts for years so he could go to college. The woman who gave up a new life after his father left, just so my son wouldn't grow up with a stepfather. The woman who lived in tiny apartments, wore old clothes, ate rice and beans for a month so he could have brand new sneakers. Selfish. Lawrence just stood there, looking at me as if I was a problem he needed to solve. Then he said something that truly broke me. "Maybe it was a mistake to suggest the bank account," he mused. "Maybe you're not in a condition to make good decisions. Maybe you need more help than I thought." More help. As if I were a burden. An incapable old woman who needed to be controlled. I stood up. I looked at both of them and told them in a voice stronger than I expected, "Dinner isn't ready. There is no dinner. If you're hungry, you can go eat somewhere else." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Lawrence stared, mouth agape. His wife let out a dry, bitter laugh, muttering something about respect and gratitude. Then Lawrence spoke with a coldness I'd never heard from him before. A sentence that still haunts me. "You should be careful," he said. "A woman your age, alone, without family who truly cares about her, can end up in a very bad place. I'm the only thing you have. Remember that before you do something stupid." They stormed out, slamming doors, leaving a trail of pure rage. I heard their car start, then drive away. I stood there in my empty kitchen, in my empty house, feeling something inside me break for good. But it wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was something different. It was clarity. An absolute certainty that my son didn't love me. That maybe he never had. That I was just a resource to him. A source of food, money, comfort. I sat back down. I looked at the bare walls, the empty spaces where furniture, bought with my own labor and effort, once stood. And for the first time in a very long time I smiled. Because Lawrence didn't know something. He didn't know I hadn't sold the furniture for money. I'd sold it to send a message. To see how he would react. To confirm what my heart already suspected. And he had reacted exactly as I'd expected. With rage, with indignation, with the attitude of someone who felt entitled to another person's things. That night, in the darkness of my empty house, I made a decision. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. I was going to let Lawrence believe he had one. And then, when he least expected it, when he was most confident, most sure of his control over me, I was going to show him who Patricia Mendez really was. Not the submissive mother he thought he knew, but the woman who had survived a broken marriage, poverty, and years of hard work. The woman who knew exactly how to protect herself. The woman he should never, ever have underestimated. There was a time I believed that being a mother was enough. That the love I gave would be returned naturally like a universal law. That the sacrifices I made every single day would build something solid. Something unbreakable between my son and me. How wrong I was. Lawrence was born on a stormy night 34 years ago. His father, the man who promised me a life together, left when the boy was barely 2. He said he wasn't ready to be a dad, that he needed to find himself, that I'd understand someday. I never understood, but I also didn't wait for him. I was left alone with a small child, a 2-bedroom apartment I could barely afford, and a secretary job paying $800 a month. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. So I got a second job cleaning offices at night. I'd leave Lawrence with my neighbor, an elderly woman who charged me $50 a week. I worked from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the office. I'd come home, feed Lawrence, bathe him, put him to bed, and then I'd leave again at 9 p.m. to clean buildings until 2 a.m. I slept 4 hours, then started all over again. I did that for years. So many years I lost count. I remember Lawrence always wanted the brand name sneakers the other kids wore. They cost $120. I earned $1,200 a month from both jobs. $120 was almost all the money I had for food for 2 weeks. But I bought them for him. Because I didn't want my son to feel less than anyone else. Because I wanted him to know his mother would do anything for him. I ate rice and beans for an entire month to afford those sneakers. When Lawrence turned 18, he wanted to go to college. A private university. $15,000 a year. I didn't have that money. I didn't even have a tenth of it. But I went to the bank. I took out a loan. I went into debt for 4 full years of his education, debt I ended up paying off for 10 years. 10 years of payments so my son could have a college degree. He graduated. He got a good job. He was making $3,000 a month, double what I was making after 30 years of work. And I was happy. I thought he could finally build his life. I thought I had finally done my job as a mother well. But Lawrence didn't leave my house right away. He said he wanted to save money, to have a solid foundation before living on his own. I told him, of course. My house is your house. Stay as long as you need. He stayed 5 more years. 5 years in which I was still working my 2 jobs. 5 years in which I paid the rent, the food, the utilities. 5 years in which Lawrence saved every single cent of his salary because he didn't have to pay for anything. When he finally left, it wasn't to rent an apartment. It was to buy a house. A $200,000 house he paid for in cash because he'd saved all his money living for free at my house. I was proud. I told him I was proud. And I was. I thought I had done the right thing by helping him. I thought that now that he had his own house, maybe he could help me. Maybe I could work less. Maybe I could rest a little. But that never happened. Lawrence got married 2 years after he moved out. His wife was an elegant woman. Always perfectly dressed, perfect nails. Always speaking with that polite tone that hid a thin layer of disdain. From the beginning, I noticed she looked at me differently, as if I was something inferior, as if she couldn't fathom why Lawrence came from where I came from. The wedding cost $30,000. I sat at a table in the back, not the main family table. Lawrence explained there were important people, clients from his job, and they needed those tables. I said I understood. I smiled for the pictures. I danced when asked. And I went home alone that night, feeling strangely empty. After the wedding, Lawrence's visits became less frequent. Before, he'd come 2 or 3 times a week. Now once every 2 weeks. Then once a month. Always in a hurry. Always looking at his phone. Always with some excuse to leave early. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the annoying mother, the one who complains, who doesn't understand her son has his own life now. But then they started coming on Friday nights. Always at dinner time. Always without notice. Always expecting food to be ready. First I was happy. I thought Lawrence finally wanted to spend time with me, that he missed me. I cooked his favorite dishes. I set the table beautifully. I bought dessert. But then I noticed something. He never came alone. His wife was always there. And they never came to talk. They came to eat. They'd arrive, sit down, eat and leave. Sometimes they stayed an hour, sometimes less. I also noticed they never brought anything. Never a bottle of wine, never a dessert, never money to help with the food. Nothing. One night after they left, I counted how much I'd spent on dinner. $45. $45 I didn't have to spare. $45 that meant I'd have to work extra hours to make up for it. And I realized something. To Lawrence, I had become a service. A free restaurant. A place where he could eat without paying, without even truly thanking me. I started to notice other things too. When I asked him for help, he always had excuses. When I needed a ride to the doctor because my car broke down, he was always busy. When I mentioned my refrigerator was making strange noises, afraid it would die, he just told me to buy a new one, as if I had $500 saved for emergencies. I didn't. I barely had enough to get to the end of the month. But what hurt the most was my 60th birthday. Lawrence arrived 2 hours late. No gift. No card. Just that excuse about traffic. He stayed for 20 minutes. He ate the cake I'd bought for myself because I didn't want to spend it alone. And he left. I cried that night like I hadn't cried in years. Because I finally understood something I'd been denying for so long. To my son, I was no longer important. I was just a resource, something available waiting to be used when he needed it. And the worst part? I had allowed it. I had established that pattern. I had never asked him for anything. I had never told him I felt used. I had never told him I needed more from him than 20-minute visits and Friday night dinners. 'Cause I was afraid. Afraid that if I complained, if I asked, if I demanded, he would disappear completely. And the idea of losing my son, even this son who barely saw me, terrified me more than anything else. So I continued to be the convenient mother. The silent mother. The mother who was always there. Door always open, never causing problems. Until that Thursday afternoon. Until Lawrence told me he wanted to manage my money. And something inside me, something that had been asleep for years, woke up. A small clear voice that told me this wasn't right. That this was the beginning of something worse. But even then, even with that voice whispering, I told him yes. Because I still had hope. I still wanted to believe my son loved me. That he would protect me. That he would do the right thing. How foolish I was. The following Monday, Lawrence came to my house with papers. Lots of papers. He spread them across the kitchen table. His smile now seeming less warm, more calculating. "Mom, this is simple," he said. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here. They're the documents so I can have access to your account. I'll transfer your paycheck automatically every month. That way I'll take care of paying your bills, managing everything. You won't have to worry about a thing." I looked at the papers. Bank forms. Authorization forms. I read the fine print, the stuff people usually ignore. And I saw something that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just access to my account. It was complete power. The authority to make transfers, to close accounts, to make all financial decisions on my behalf. "Lawrence," I said, "this says you'd have total control over my money." He nodded as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yes, Mom. This way it's easier. I can manage everything without having to ask for authorizations every time. It's for practicality." Practicality. That word echoed in my head. Practicality for who? I asked myself but didn't say it out loud. I took the pen he offered. I held it. For a moment I was about to sign. I was about to hand over everything because that's what I had always done, trust, hand over. But then I remembered Friday night. I remembered his face, full of fury, when he saw the empty house. I remembered his words, how he had threatened me, though he probably didn't even realize it was a threat. I put the pen down. "You know what, Lawrence? Give me a few days to think about it. I want to read everything carefully. I want to be sure." His expression changed just for a second. A flash of irritation crossed his face before he plastered on the smile again. "Mom, there's nothing to think about. It's simple. But fine. If you want a few days, that's okay." He left, but he left the papers as if assuming I'd sign them anyway. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed up looking at those papers on the kitchen table. And something inside me screamed, "This isn't for your own good." This was the beginning of something I couldn't undo. The next day I went to the bank. Early before my job. I asked the teller to check my account, to show me all transactions from the last 6 months. She printed the papers. Several pages. I checked them carefully line by line. And then I saw it. I saw it and the floor moved beneath my feet. A withdrawal I hadn't made. $1,200 from 3 months ago. Money that had left my account and I didn't remember taking it out. I asked the teller for more details. She checked her computer and told me something that took my breath away. The withdrawal had been made at a branch on the other side of town. With my debit card. But I had never been to that branch. And my card was in my purse. It had always been in my purse except for one time. I remembered. 3 months ago Lawrence had visited. I was in the shower when he arrived. I yelled for him to come in, the door was open. When I came out he was in the living room waiting. We talked. At some point I went to the kitchen to make coffee. My purse was in my handbag. My handbag was in the living room. With Lawrence. I felt nauseous. The whole world tilted. This could only mean one thing. My son had taken my card. He'd memorized or photographed the numbers. And he'd taken money from my account without my permission. I asked the teller if there was any way to know exactly what had happened. She said I needed to file a formal claim. The bank would investigate. Could take weeks. I told her I'd think about it. I left the bank feeling like I no longer knew my own son, but I didn't file the claim. Not yet, because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if this had been just once or if there were more. The next few days I spent checking everything. Every paper in my house, every document, every old bank statement I'd saved in a box in my closet. And I found more things. I found that 2 years ago when I was in the hospital for pneumonia, someone had used my health insurance for consultations I hadn't made. Consultations at clinics I didn't know. Consultations that had exhausted my annual coverage, which was why I'd had to pay out of my own pocket for medications that year. I also found a credit card in my name that I didn't remember applying for. A card with a balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases I hadn't made, at stores I had never been in. I called the credit card company. They told me the account had been opened 18 months ago. They gave me a list of where purchases had been made. Hardware stores, electronic stores, home furniture stores. Lawrence had bought a house 2 years ago. Lawrence had renovated that house. And apparently Lawrence had used my credit to do it. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by papers, feeling like everything I had believed about my life was falling apart. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. It was knowing my son had been stealing from me for years. That he had seen me as an unlimited resource, something he could exploit without consequences. That he had never intended to care for me or protect me. I cried. I cried until I had no more tears. And then I wiped my face, gathered all the papers and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I wasn't going to yell or complain. Because I knew if I did, he'd deny everything. He'd say I was confused. He'd say I was senile. He'd say anything to make me doubt my own memory, my own sanity. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I was going to collect proof. Document everything. I was going to build a case so solid he couldn't deny it. And then only then would I act. That Friday Lawrence came back as always at dinner time expecting food. But this time I had cooked something different. I made his favorite dish. Chicken with sauce and rice. The same dish I used to make when he was a little boy and came home from school feeling sad. The dish that told him how much I loved him without needing words. He sat down with his wife. They ate. They talked about superficial things, work, the weather, a new movie. I watched them. I watched them as if I was seeing them for the first time. And I realized something. Lawrence ate my food with the same indifference he would eat a fast food burger. No gratitude in his eyes. No love. Just the mechanical act of eating something for free. When they finished, Lawrence pulled out the bank papers again. He placed them next to his empty plate. Mom, the days you asked for have passed. You've thought about it, right? Sign this and I'll take care of everything. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him, in the calmest voice I could find, that I still wasn't sure. That I needed more time. His wife scoffed. Patricia, this is ridiculous. Lawrence is just trying to help you. I don't understand why you're being so distrustful. Distrustful? She called me distrustful. And the saddest thing was she was right. But not in the way she thought. Lawrence stood up, his expression hard now, without the mask of a smile. Mom, this is for your own good. You can't keep managing your finances alone. It's obvious. Look at how you sold the furniture without thinking. Look at the irrational decisions you're making. Irrational. Selling my own furniture in my own house was irrational? But stealing from me for years wasn't? I didn't say anything. I just held his gaze until he looked away. They left that night without saying goodbye. And I stayed seated in my kitchen, looking at those unsigned papers, knowing the war had just begun. A silent war. A war I had to win. Because if I lost, I wouldn't just lose my money. I would lose my dignity, my autonomy, my life. The days after that dinner were strange. Lawrence didn't call. He didn't visit. It was as if he decided to punish me with his absence, believing I'd fall apart, that I'd beg him to come back, that I'd finally sign those papers just to get his attention. But I didn't fall apart. For the first time in years, the silence of my house didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of clarity. I spent those days meticulously going through every detail of my financial life. Every receipt, every bank statement, every paper connected to money. And the more I looked, the more I found. I discovered that 3 years ago, when Lawrence asked to borrow my ID because he'd lost his, and needed to pick up an urgent package, he had done something else with it. He had opened an electricity service account in my name, at an address that wasn't mine. His house. For 3 years, Lawrence's electricity bill had been in my name. And when he didn't pay on time, the penalties piled up on my credit history. That's why I'd been denied a small loan last year when my car needed urgent repairs. That's why my credit score had mysteriously gone down. I called the electricity company. I explained the account wasn't mine, that I'd never lived at that address. The woman on the phone told me I needed to file a sworn statement, that I had to report this as identity fraud. Identity fraud. Committed by my own son. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for I don't know how long, trying to process how I had gotten to this point, trying to understand at what moment my son had become this. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the city sounds. And I thought about all the times I had justified his behavior. All the times I told myself he was busy, that he had his own life, that I was being demanding by expecting more from him. But this wasn't about expectations. This was about theft, about deception, about a son who saw his mother as a resource to exploit without consequence. The next morning I did something I had never done. I went to see a lawyer. A small office in the city center. William Sanchez, attorney at law. I'd seen an ad for free consultations. I went in feeling small, feeling ridiculous. A 62-year-old woman complaining about her own son. But the receptionist smiled kindly and showed me in. Attorney Sanchez was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes. He asked me to tell him everything. And I did. I told him about the disappearing money, the fraudulent credit card, the electricity account, the papers Lawrence wanted me to sign. He listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Mrs. Mendez, he said, what you're describing is financial fraud and a breach of trust. If you sign those papers your son is asking for, you're giving him total legal access to your money. He could empty it all out, and you would have no legal recourse because you yourself gave him permission. The words fell on me like stones. I knew it. Deep down I knew it. But hearing it said aloud by a professional made it real in a different way. What can I do? I asked. He leaned forward. First, don't sign anything. Second, you need to report the credit card fraud and the theft from your bank account. Third, you need to change all your passwords, your PINs, everything. Fourth, consider a restraining order if you feel you're in danger. A restraining order against my own son. The idea seemed absurd and devastating at the same time. I don't want to get him in legal trouble, I said. He's my son. The lawyer looked at me with compassion and sadness. Mrs. Mendez, your son is already in legal trouble. He's committed several felonies. The question isn't whether you want to get him in trouble. The question is whether you want to protect yourself. I left that office with a folder full of forms and a list of things to do. I felt overwhelmed, but also something else. I felt determined. I went straight to the bank. I changed all my passwords. I requested a new debit card. I closed the fraudulent credit card and filed a formal dispute. The teller helped me with everything, treating me with patience, never making me feel stupid or weak. When I got home that afternoon I was exhausted but strangely light, as if I'd shed an invisible weight I'd been carrying for years. That night Lawrence finally called. His voice was tense. Mom, we need to talk. Come over for dinner at my place tomorrow. We have to sort this out. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. And before, I would have obeyed without question. But now, after everything I discovered, I only felt a cold calm. I can't tomorrow, I told him. I'm busy. Busy? Mom, what can you be busy with? He scoffed. This is important. For you maybe, I said. For me there are other more important things now. There was a silence on the other end, heavy with surprise and irritation. You're acting very weird, Mom. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you need to stop being so stubborn and sign those papers. This is for your own good. For my own good. Those words again, as if stealing from me were an act of love. Lawrence, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I'm not going to sign anything. And I think we need to have a very serious conversation about several things. About what things? He asked, his voice different now, more alert, cautious. About money that has left my account without my permission. About credit cards I didn't apply for. About utility accounts in my name at addresses where I don't live. The silence that followed was absolute, so thick I could almost feel it through the phone. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally said, his voice controlled, but I could detect the panic underneath. I think you do, I told him. And I think you need to think very carefully about what you're going to say next. Mom, you're delusional. You're confused. Maybe you need to see a doctor. There it was. The card I knew he would play. The card to make me seem senile, confused, incapable. I'm not confused, Lawrence. I have all the papers. I have all the proof. And I've already spoken with a lawyer. Another silence. This one longer. Heavier. You spoke with a lawyer? His voice was almost a whisper now. Almost a threat. Yes. And he explained exactly what you've been doing. He explained what fraud is. What's illegal? Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Everything I've done has been to help you. Help me. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Lawrence, you stole from me. For years you used me. You lied to me. I would never. He began, but I cut him off. Yes, you did. And you know it. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? I heard his breathing on the other end. Heavy. Agitated. I'm coming over, he said. We need to talk in person. No, I told him. You are not coming over. If you want to talk, we can do it on the phone, Or we can do it with lawyers present. You're crazy, he yelled. Completely crazy. After everything I've done for you, after all the times I've come to see you, that I've worried about you. All the times you came to eat for free, you mean? All the times you needed something from me. But the times I needed you, where were you? I hung up then before he could respond, before he could manipulate me with words again. I sat there in my kitchen, phone in hand, trembling. But not with fear. With rage. Years and years of suppressed rage that was finally finding its voice. That night I slept better than I had in months. Because I had finally told the truth. I had finally stood my ground. And although I didn't know what would come next, I knew I was no longer going to be the silent mother who allowed herself to be trampled on. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if a thick fog had lifted from my mind. And now I could see everything with an almost painful sharpness. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stop now. After breakfast, I grabbed my purse and left the house. I had a mental list of all the places I needed to visit. All the loose ends I needed to tie up. If Lawrence thought I was a confused, helpless old woman, he was about to discover how wrong he was. My first stop was the main bank where I had my savings account, not the checking account where my paycheck came in, but the other one, opened 30 years ago when I still dreamed of buying my own house. I had $7,200 saved there. It wasn't a lot after a lifetime of work, but it was mine. I asked the manager to close the account. She asked if I was sure if there was a problem. I just said I wanted to make some changes. She gave me the money in a cashier's check and recommended I open an account at another bank for greater security. I followed her advice. I went to a different bank, one on the other side of town, one where Lawrence had never gone with me. I opened a new account, one only I knew about, one where he could never find my money. Then I went to the electricity company. I filed all the documents Attorney Sanchez had helped me prepare. The sworn statement, the copy of my ID, proof I'd never lived at that address. The woman helping me reviewed everything and said they'd start an investigation, that the account would be transferred or closed, and I would no longer be responsible. I felt an invisible chain fall from my shoulders. My next stop was the credit bureau. I requested a full report. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to know if Lawrence had done more behind my back. The employee handed me a thick document. I sat in the waiting room and read it page by page. There was something else. A personal loan of $5,000 taken out 2 years ago in my name. A loan that had never been fully paid and was now in collections. $5,000. I felt rage rise in my throat again like bile. I marked every fraudulent item with a marker. I filled out the dispute forms one by one with clear, firm handwriting. When I left that office, it was almost 3 p.m. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but I wasn't hungry. I had something stronger than hunger. A purpose. I then went to my neighbor's house, Mrs. Alice Morrison. She was 70, had lived in the building since before me. We'd been friends for decades, though we drifted apart a bit. I'd been so focused on Lawrence, so consumed with trying to maintain that relationship, that I'd neglected other connections. I knocked. She opened the door, surprised. Patricia. What a surprise. Come in, come in. We went into her living room. She offered coffee. I accepted. We sat, and she looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen a lot in life. You look different, she said. I don't know what it is, but there's something different about you. And then I told her everything. About Lawrence, the money, the betrayal, everything I discovered. I talked for almost an hour without stopping. She listened without interrupting, nodding from time to time. Her expression a mix of sadness and recognition. When I finished, she sighed deeply. Patricia, I knew something wasn't right. I saw it every Friday when he came over. The way he treated you like a service. But I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place. But I'm glad you're finally seeing the truth. She took my hand. Her fingers were cool, but her grip was firm. I need to ask you a favor, I told her. I need you to be my witness. I need that if Lawrence comes and tries to say I'm confused, that I'm senile, you can confirm that's not the case. That I am in full control of my faculties. She nodded without hesitation. Of course. And more than that, if you ever need a place to stay, if you don't feel safe in your house, my door is open. Those words filled me with such deep gratitude. It almost made me cry. But I didn't cry. I had cried enough. Now it was time to act. That night, back in my house, I organized all the documents. I put them in a large folder, made copies of everything. I put the originals in a safe place and left the copies in the folder. If anything happened to me, if Lawrence tried something, there would be evidence. There would be proof. I also wrote a letter detailing everything I had discovered, everything Lawrence had done. I put it in a sealed envelope with instructions to open it only in case of an emergency, and gave it to Mrs. Alice to keep. I was preparing myself like a general preparing for battle, because I knew Lawrence wasn't going to let this go. I knew he would come. He would try to manipulate me, to convince me, to make me doubt myself. But I was no longer the same woman I had been 2 weeks ago. That woman had died the night Lawrence threatened me in my own kitchen. The woman I was now was different. Stronger. Clearer. More determined. On Wednesday afternoon, as I was making tea, I heard a car stop outside. I looked out the window. Lawrence's car. He got out, his wife with him. They looked determined. They were coming to confront me. I took a deep breath. I put down my teacup. And I waited. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times, each time more insistent. I opened the door, but I didn't invite them in. I stayed on the threshold, blocking the entrance. "We need to talk," Lawrence said, his voice hard, no pretense of friendliness. "I'm listening," I told him. "Inside, Mom. We're not going to talk in the hallway." "We have nothing to talk about inside," I replied. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." His wife scoffed. "This is ridiculous, Patricia. Stop acting like we're enemies." "You're not enemies," I told them. "Enemies are honest about their hostility. You are worse. You are thieves who hide behind pretty words." Lawrence took a step toward me, his face red with fury. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done for me, Lawrence?" I retorted, my voice steady. "I have the records. I have the proof. I know exactly how much money you've stolen from me. I know about the fraudulent credit cards. I know about the electricity account. I know about everything." He froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "And now," I continued with a calmness that surprised me, "you have 2 options. Either you give me back everything you stole, every single cent, or I go to the police and file charges for fraud." "You can't do that," his wife cried. "He's your son." "That's exactly why it hurts so much," I replied. "Because he's my son. Because I gave him everything, and he repaid me by stealing from me." Lawrence finally found his voice. "You owe me," he yelled. "My whole life I grew up without a father. My whole life I had to see you work and be tired. That was your fault. You chose to have me. You chose to stay alone. I didn't ask to be born." His words landed like blows, but they no longer hurt me like before. Because now I could see them for what they were, justifications, excuses from someone who knew he had done something unforgivable and was trying to shift the blame. "You're right," I told him. "I chose to have you, and it was the best decision of my life until it stopped being. But that doesn't give you the right to steal from me. That doesn't give you the right to exploit me. I didn't steal anything from you. I just took what was owed to me." "Nothing was owed to you, Lawrence. I gave you everything you needed when you were a child. When you were an adult, it was no longer my obligation. And it definitely wasn't my obligation to give you access to my money without my knowledge." His wife grabbed his arm. "Let's go. It's not worth it. She's already lost." "Lost?" I echoed. What an interesting choice of words. As if I were the one who was wrong. As if defending my own money and my dignity were crazy. They left. They went down the stairs without looking back. I closed the door, feeling strangely calm. That night, Attorney Sanchez called. He told me the banks had confirmed the fraud, that the credit card money would be canceled, that they were investigating the unauthorized withdrawals. He said I had a solid case if I decided to file criminal charges. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my empty living room, in my house that no longer had a TV or elegant furniture, and for the first time in a long time I felt rich. Rich in something money couldn't buy. Rich in dignity and strength, in the certainty that I was doing the right thing. The days following that confrontation at my door were strangely silent, as if the whole world were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I found myself in an emotional limbo, where rage and pain mixed with a growing sense of liberation I didn't quite know how to process. Lawrence didn't call again. He didn't show up at my door. And for the first time in years, I wasn't constantly waiting for his contact. I wasn't checking my phone every hour for a message. I wasn't making excuses in my mind to justify his absence or silence. But even though he wasn't physically present, his digital presence was impossible to ignore. Something in me led me to check his social media, something I didn't normally do, thinking it was an invasion of privacy. But now, I felt I had the right to know what he was doing, what he was saying, how he was presenting his life to the world while I dealt with the consequences of his actions in private. What I found left me breathless with its audacity, with the absolute disconnect between reality and the image he was projecting. He posted a photo the day after our confrontation. Him and his wife in an elegant restaurant, smiling, wine glasses in hand. The caption read something about celebrating the release of toxic energies, and surrounding oneself only with people who bring value to life. As if I were the toxicity he needed to free himself from. As if refusing to let him steal more was negativity he'd wisely removed from his existence. The comments were all positive, congratulating him on mental peace, on setting healthy boundaries, on prioritizing emotional well-being. I stared at that screen, a mix of disbelief and disgust churning in my stomach. All those people supporting him had no idea the man they celebrated had been stealing from his own mother for years. There were more posts in the following days, each more elaborate, as if Lawrence were deliberately constructing a public narrative completely divorced from the truth. A photo at the gym with a reflection on self-care, and investing in oneself before being able to help others. Profound words until you remember this was the same man who used stolen money to buy gym memberships and expensive athletic clothes. Another photo of him working on his computer, A comment about sacrifice and hard work to build a successful future, without mentioning that future was partially financed with fraudulent credit cards in my name and utility accounts I was paying for without knowing it. What impacted me most was a post he made that Friday, the exact day he would normally have come for dinner. He shared an old photo of himself as a child with me, a photo I didn't even know he had, where I was holding him, maybe 5 years old, both of us smiling. The text accompanying it was something about how sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the most, about learning that love doesn't mean tolerating abusive behavior, about making the difficult decision to distance himself from a toxic family relationship for the sake of his mental health. Reading those words felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Lawrence had taken our story, our real relationship with all its complicated, painful nuances, and completely inverted it, presenting himself as the victim and me as the abuser. The comments on that post were even more abundant. Dozens of people expressing support, telling him how brave he was, sharing their own stories of difficult family relationships, completely validating his fabricated version of events. People I knew were in those comments, neighbors, former co-workers, all offering him words of encouragement, without the slightest idea that the person he supposedly needed to protect himself from was the woman who'd worked 2 jobs for years to give him the education he now used to get his high-paying job. For several days, I watched this digital spectacle in silence, without commenting, without reacting publicly. Something in me knew this was Lawrence's game, and if I responded emotionally, I'd fall into his trap, giving him more ammunition for his narrative of me as the unstable, problematic mother. But every new post, every new supportive comment from people who didn't know the truth, was like a small wound opening deep inside me. Not because I cared what those people thought of me, but because it hurt to see how easily people believed a well-told story, without questioning if there could be another side. The last straw came when Lawrence posted a story showing the house he and his wife had bought, displaying the renovations, the new furniture, the perfectly designed garden, all presented as the fruit of his hard work and dedication, without a single mention that a significant part of it was paid for with money that wasn't his, with credit obtained fraudulently using my personal information. He showed it all with such pride, such satisfaction, as if he truly believed he'd earned it all himself, as if he'd completely forgotten or simply didn't care that every brick of that house was partially built on the sacrifice and theft from his own mother. I watched him live his life in those small digital windows, and wondered how someone could sleep at night knowing what they had done. How was it possible to maintain that facade of a successful, ethically correct person while simultaneously committing fraud and theft against the person who gave them life? I wondered if he ever felt guilt. If ever, in the middle of one of those elegant dinners or gym workouts, he'd stop and think about his mother, alone in an empty house, who'd sold her furniture so she could eat, because her own son had been systematically stealing from her for years. But looking at his posts, seeing the ease with which he built and maintained this perfect public image, I came to understand something fundamental about Lawrence that maybe I had always known, but never wanted to admit. My son had developed the ability to create parallel realities in his mind, where he could be simultaneously the abandoned son deserving compensation and the successful man who built everything himself, where he could justify theft as something rightfully his, while presenting himself publicly as a victim of family toxicity. It was a form of cognitive dissonance so deep, it almost seemed as if he really believed his own lies, as if he had built a narrative so elaborate in his head that the line between truth and fiction had completely blurred. And as I watched all this from the silent distance of my empty house, something inside me hardened even more, because seeing Lawrence not only steal from me, but also steal my story, completely inverting the roles of victim and victimizer in his public presentation, made me understand there was no redemption possible here. No conversation I could have that would make him see the reality of what he had done. He had chosen his path. He had chosen the lie over the truth. He had chosen image over substance. And I needed to accept that the son I had raised and loved had never really existed in the way I believed, or had been completely replaced by this stranger who could smile for the camera while destroying his mother in private, without apparently feeling any genuine remorse. The moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in a way I hadn't planned, but in retrospect I realized had been inevitable, because the truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how many layers of lies are piled on top, trying to keep it buried. I was in Attorney Sanchez's office, reviewing the final documents, when he informed me that the banks had completed their investigations. They had confirmed a total of $17,000 in fraudulent transactions over 3 years. An amount that took my breath away, not just the number but what it represented: premeditation. This wasn't a mistake, or a moment of weakness. It was a systematic, deliberate operation of theft that required constant effort from Lawrence. The lawyer explained that with this evidence, I had more than enough to file criminal charges. But there was another option. Send a formal demand letter, giving him the chance to return the stolen money and compensate for damages before more severe legal action. He said this was a courtesy many victims of family fraud offered, understanding that family ties complicated things. But he also warned me this courtesy could be seen as weakness by the perpetrator, and I needed to be prepared for Lawrence to respond not with gratitude or remorse, but with more manipulation and denial. I thought about that for several minutes, sitting there in the office, looking at the documents detailing every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized account, every lie my son had carefully constructed for years. A part of me still held a small, irrational hope. If Lawrence was confronted with irrefutable evidence, maybe something in him would awaken. Maybe he'd find a vestige of conscience or remorse, or at least the basic recognition that he had crossed a line. That part of me, still his mother despite everything, wanted to give him that opportunity to do the right thing, to correct his mistake, to show that somewhere deep inside him, the person I had raised with so much love and sacrifice still existed. But there was another part of me, stronger and clearer, that knew exactly what Lawrence would do with that opportunity. It knew he would take it not as an extension of grace, but as confirmation that I was too weak to really hurt him, that he could continue to manipulate and control me because at the end of the day I would always give in. Because I was his mother. And mothers always forgive, always give another chance, always choose love over justice. That part of me understood that a private warning would only give him time to prepare his defense, to hide more evidence, to build an even more elaborate narrative of victimization he could use publicly to destroy my credibility before I could act. I told Attorney Sanchez I didn't want to send a private letter. I didn't want to give Lawrence the opportunity to respond in private, where he could continue controlling the narrative. Instead, I asked him to prepare the necessary documents to file a formal civil lawsuit. A lawsuit that would become a public record, where anyone who wanted to verify the truth could do so, instead of simply believing the version of events Lawrence had been so carefully building on his social media. The lawyer nodded with what seemed to be a mix of surprise and respect. He probably didn't expect a woman my age to make such a direct, unambiguous decision. He told me he would proceed immediately with the preparation of all necessary documents, and Lawrence would be officially notified within the next 72 hours. I left that office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, something I couldn't identify at first, until I realized it was power. The power of having made a decision completely by myself without consulting anyone, without asking for permission, without worrying about how it would make me look to others, or if people would think I was being too harsh with my own son. For the first time in decades, I had chosen to protect myself over protecting the feelings or reputation of another person, even when that person was my son. And that choice, although painful, filled me with a sense of integrity I had forgotten was possible to feel. The notification reached Lawrence on a Thursday morning, as Attorney Sanchez confirmed by phone. I wasn't there to see his initial reaction, but I could perfectly imagine the moment he opened that official envelope and read the documents detailing every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized account, every dollar he had stolen, meticulously documented with dates and bank reference numbers that made any denial impossible. I didn't have to wait long to confirm my imagination because less than 2 hours after he received the notification, my phone began to ring with an insistence that bordered on desperation. Call after call that I let go to voicemail without answering, because I no longer had anything to say to Lawrence that wasn't contained in those legal documents. I listened to the voicemails later that night, when I finally felt emotionally prepared. It was fascinating in a disturbing way, to hear the progression of his panic through each successive message. The first still tried to maintain composure, with that controlled voice he used when he tried to seem reasonable, telling me this was a terrible misunderstanding, and we needed to talk immediately before things got more out of control. The second message already had a different tone. Higher pitched, more urgent. He was pleading with me to call him, saying this was going to ruin his life, that I should please think about what I was doing before destroying my own son. As if I were the one destroying something, instead of simply revealing the destruction he had caused for years. By the fifth message, Lawrence was no longer trying to sound reasonable or appeal to my maternal compassion. He had completely turned to rage and thinly veiled threats, telling me I was going to regret this, that he had his own lawyers who were going to prove I was a senile old woman who didn't know what she was doing, that he was going to fight this with everything he had, and that in the end I was going to be the villain of this story. I listened to each message until the end, allowing myself to feel nothing other than a kind of clinical curiosity about how a person could so quickly go from pleading to threatening when they realized their usual manipulation tactics no longer worked. The following days were a whirlwind of legal and emotional activity. Lawrence didn't stay still. He began his own counter-campaign, starting by publishing a long, elaborate statement on his social media about how he was the victim of a terrible injustice perpetrated by a mother he supposedly loved, but who was now legally attacking him for reasons he couldn't fully comprehend. His post was carefully drafted to generate maximum sympathy, without mentioning any specific details of the accusations against him, painting himself as the confused and hurt son being dragged through a traumatic legal process by a mother who was perhaps experiencing age-related mental health problems. The response to his post was exactly what he expected, with dozens of comments expressing shock and solidarity, telling him to keep his head up, that the truth would eventually prevail, that they were on his side no matter what. I watched all this from a distance, with a mixture of awe and repulsion at his ability to manipulate the narrative, even when faced with documented legal charges. But something had changed in me. This time his public theater didn't affect me in the same way. This time I knew I had something more powerful than his carefully constructed words. And that something was irrefutable legal documents that could not be manipulated with emotional rhetoric or appeals to sympathy. Lawrence's real collapse began when his own lawyers reviewed the evidence against him and apparently told him something he didn't want to hear. Because suddenly his social media posts stopped abruptly. And the silence that followed was deafening in its eloquence. Attorney Sanchez informed me that Lawrence's legal representatives had contacted him, asking about the possibility of reaching an out-of-court settlement, which basically confirmed they knew he had no real defense against the evidence I had presented, and that his best option was to try to minimize the damage before this proceeded to a public trial where all the dirty details would be revealed in public access documents. It was then that the cracks began to appear in Lawrence's carefully constructed life. Apparently, some of his closest friends started asking uncomfortable questions after his wife casually mentioned at a social gathering that they were dealing with a complicated family legal problem. And once people started to investigate a little deeper, they discovered the public documents of the lawsuit that detailed the specific accusations of financial fraud. Mrs. Alice told me she had heard from other neighbors that Lawrence's name was being mentioned in neighborhood conversations in ways that were definitely not flattering. That people who had once seen him as the successful, educated son now looked at him with suspicion and distrust. His wife was apparently furious, not necessarily about the moral implications of what Lawrence had done, but about the damage to their social reputation. And according to rumors that reached my ears through the neighborhood gossip network, there had been considerable fights in their house about how to handle the situation. Lawrence tried to call me several more times during those weeks, but I maintained my absolute silence, because there was nothing he could say to me that would change the documented facts of what he had done. And that silence of mine was apparently more devastating to him than any angry word I could have said, because it meant that I had completely moved from anger to indifference. And that indifference was the final death of any power he ever had over me. The final settlement was reached 3 months after I filed the lawsuit. The terms were exactly what Attorney Sanchez and I had established as the minimum acceptable, because Lawrence had no choice but to accept when his own lawyers explained to him that going to trial would mean not only the complete public revelation of all the details of his fraud, but also the very real possibility of criminal charges that could result in jail time. He had to return the full $17,000, plus another $5,000 in compensation for damages, in addition to paying for all the credit cleanup fees and my lawyer's fees. And all of this had to be paid within 6 months, with verifiable monthly payments, or the agreement would be automatically invalidated, and the criminal charges would proceed without further warning. But beyond the money, which honestly had never been the main point of all this, the agreement included a clause I had insisted on adding, and that Attorney Sanchez initially thought was unnecessary, but for me it was absolutely essential. That clause stated that Lawrence had to issue a public statement acknowledging that he had committed financial fraud against his mother, and that the accusations in my lawsuit were true and well-founded. He fought that clause more than any other part of the agreement, because he knew exactly what it would mean for his carefully cultivated image. To publicly admit that everything he had been saying about being a victim of a toxic mother was a lie designed to cover up his own crimes. The statement appeared on his social media on a Tuesday afternoon. It was brief and clearly drafted by his lawyers to minimize the damage as much as possible within the limits of what the agreement required. But still, the words were there in black text on a white background, admitting that he had accessed bank accounts without authorization, that he had opened credit cards using another person's information, and that he had made serious errors in judgment that he deeply regretted. The comments under that post were wild, with people who had previously supported him unconditionally now expressing shock and disappointment, while others who had apparently suspected something all along felt validated in their doubts. And I watched all that digital drama unfold with a sense of closure that had nothing to do with satisfaction or revenge, but simply with the quiet recognition that the truth had finally been told. Publicly, the first payment arrived in my account on the exact date specified, and each subsequent payment arrived punctually as well, because Lawrence knew that a single missed payment would mean consequences he definitely could not afford to face. And with that money, I did something he never expected me to do. Instead of simply putting it back into my savings, or using it to replace the furniture I had sold, I bought a plane ticket to a place I had never been before. I had spent 62 years living for other people, first for my son's father, then for my son, and then for the illusion of maintaining a family relationship that only existed in my imagination. And now, for the first time in my adult life, I had the freedom and the resources to live exactly how I wanted, without having to justify my decisions to anyone. I bought a small house in a coastal town 3 hours from where I had lived my whole life. A house with 2 rooms and a yard where I could finally plant the flowers I had always wanted, but never had time to care for when I was working 2 jobs. The house cost $40,000, which I paid for in cash using a combination of the payments from Lawrence and the savings I had managed to protect in my new bank account. And when I signed the purchase papers, I felt something I could only describe as a rebirth, because this house was mine in a way that no other place had been mine before. Purchased with money that had been returned through justice, not earned through endless sacrifice. Lawrence tried to contact me one last time after the final payment was made, completely fulfilling the terms of the agreement. And this time I answered the phone, because I knew there was nothing he could take from me or use against me. His voice sounded different, smaller, more humble, when he asked me if we could ever really talk, if there would ever be a possibility of some kind of reconciliation. I listened to his question in silence before responding with words I had been preparing in my mind for months. I told him that the son I raised never really existed, or died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone I didn't know and didn't want to know, and that although I wished him peace and growth in his life, that peace and that growth would have to happen away from me, because I had closed that door. Not out of hatred but out of self-love. There was a long silence after my words, and then a sound that could have been a sob, or just broken breathing, before he hung up without saying anything else. And that was the last time I spoke with Lawrence, because some doors once closed need to stay closed. Not as a punishment but as a protection. Now I live in my small house by the sea, and I spend my mornings drinking coffee in my garden, watching the flowers that I planted with my own hands grow. And there is a peace in this simple life that I never found in all those years of sacrifice and giving, because I finally understood that true love begins with oneself, and that no relationship is worth maintaining if it requires you to betray your own dignity. Sometimes I see Mrs. Alice, who comes to visit every few weeks, bringing gossip from the old neighborhood and news of people we used to know, and she tells me that I look different now, lighter, more alive in ways that go beyond the physical. I have a routine now that is completely mine. I wake up when my body wants to wake up, not when an alarm clock forces me to. I cook meals that I like without thinking about someone else's tastes. I spend my afternoons reading books I always wanted to read but never had time for. And at night I sit on my small porch, listening to the distant sound of the waves, and feeling a deep gratitude. Not for what I have in material terms, but for what I finally understood about my own worth. This is my victory. Not in the money recovered, or in Lawrence's public admission, but in the fact that I recovered myself from decades of conditioning that had taught me a mother's worth was measured only by how much she could give and how much she could endure. I learned that saying no is an act of self-love, that setting boundaries is not cruelty but necessity, that protecting your peace is not selfishness but wisdom. And now I live every day as a testament to those lessons, learned too late, but not too late to matter. I closed that door on Lawrence not for revenge but for dignity. And that distinction makes all the difference because it means that I won not by becoming his enemy, but simply by refusing to continue being my own victim.